The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton as Colonel Marcus Henderson made his routine inspection of the main gate. At 52, Henderson had spent nearly 3 decades in the military, working his way up from a fresh-faced lieutenant to his current position as base commander. His reputation for maintaining strict security protocols was legendary throughout the armed forces. Nothing and no one passed through his gates without proper verification. As he approached the checkpoint, Henderson noticed an unusual commotion. Sergeant Williams, one of his most trusted gate guards, was engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with a woman in civilian clothes. She stood about 5 feet 6 inches tall, with short auburn hair and an unremarkable business suit that could have belonged to any government worker in Washington. What caught Henderson's attention was her calm demeanor despite the obvious tension in the air. "Is there a problem here, Sergeant?" Henderson called out as he approached the checkpoint booth. Sergeant Williams turned with visible relief. "Sir, this woman claims she has clearance to enter the base, but her identification doesn't match our database. She's insisting we call some special number. But protocol states that proper identification must be verified through appropriate channels," Henderson interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of years in command. He turned his attention to the woman who had remained silent during the exchange. "Ma'am, I'm Colonel Henderson, commanding officer of this installation. I understand there's some confusion about your credentials." The woman extended her hand in a firm handshake. "Dr. Sarah Mitchell," she said simply. "I appreciate your diligence, Colonel. Security is paramount, and I wouldn't expect anything less from a facility of this caliber." Henderson studied her face, noting the calm confidence in her eyes. Most civilians became flustered when confronted by military authority, especially when their credentials were questioned. Dr. Mitchell showed no such signs of distress. If anything, she seemed to approve of the rigorous security measures. "Dr. Mitchell, Sergeant Williams tells me your identification isn't registering in our system. That's highly unusual. This base maintains one of the most comprehensive security databases in the military. Everyone with legitimate clearance is in our system." Dr. Mitchell reached into her briefcase and withdrew a leather credential holder. "Colonel, I understand your position completely. However, there are certain types of clearance that operate outside standard military databases. I'm hoping you'll take a closer look at my credentials before making a final determination." Henderson accepted the leather folder with a skeptical expression. In his experience, people who claimed to have special clearance usually turned out to be either delusional civilians or low-level government workers trying to impress their way onto a military base. He had seen it all before: bureaucrats with inflated egos, contractors trying to bypass proper procedures, and occasionally, individuals with legitimate but outdated credentials who refused to accept that their access had expired. Opening the folder, Henderson immediately noticed the weight and quality of the badge inside. It wasn't the typical plastic laminated identification card he was accustomed to seeing. This was substantial, crafted from what appeared to be high-grade metal with intricate detailing. The photograph showed Dr. Mitchell, but the formatting and design elements were unlike anything he had encountered in his decades of service. "This is certainly unique," Henderson said, examining the badge more closely. "But I have to tell you, Doctor, I've never seen credentials like these before. The design, the materials, even the layout, none of this matches any government identification I'm familiar with." Dr. Mitchell nodded understandingly. "I realize it's unusual, Colonel. That's precisely why I suggested calling the verification number. There are protocols in place for exactly this type of situation." Henderson looked up from the badge, his expression hardening. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I've been in the military for nearly 30 years. I've seen every type of credential, clearance, and authorization that exists within our system. What you're showing me looks more like a movie prop than legitimate government identification." The accusation hung in the air between them. Sergeant Williams shifted uncomfortably, while 2 other guards who had gathered nearby watched the exchange with growing interest. Dr. Mitchell's expression didn't change, but Henderson noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. "Colonel Henderson," she said quietly, "I understand your skepticism. In your position, I would react exactly the same way. However, I would urge you to look more carefully at the details of that badge before reaching a final conclusion." Henderson glanced down at the badge again, his attention caught by something he hadn't noticed initially. The lighting had changed as clouds moved across the sun, and now certain elements of the badge seemed to shimmer differently. What he had initially dismissed as decorative flourishes appeared to have more significance upon closer inspection. "The metalwork is certainly impressive," he admitted grudgingly, "but impressive craftsmanship doesn't necessarily indicate authenticity. Anyone with enough money and motivation could have something like this manufactured." Dr. Mitchell reached into her briefcase again and withdrew a single sheet of paper. "Colonel, before you make your final determination, I'd like you to consider making that verification call. The number is on this paper, along with a reference code that will confirm my identity and authorization." Henderson accepted the paper, noting the official letterhead and formal formatting. The phone number had a Washington, D.C. area code, and the reference code was a complex alphanumeric sequence that would be difficult to fabricate. Still, he had seen convincing forgeries before. "Dr. Mitchell, I appreciate your patience, but I'm sure you understand that I can't simply accept unusual credentials without proper verification. If this badge is legitimate, then the verification process will confirm that. If it's not..." He left the implication hanging. "I completely understand, Colonel. I wouldn't expect you to compromise security protocols based on my word alone. All I ask is that you follow the verification procedures exactly as they're outlined. The people on the other end of that phone number are expecting your call." Henderson studied her face one more time, searching for any sign of deception or uncertainty. Dr. Mitchell met his gaze steadily, her confidence unwavering. Whether she was an exceptionally skilled con artist or there was more to her credentials than immediately apparent. "Very well," Henderson said finally. "We'll make the call. But I want you to understand that if these credentials prove to be fraudulent, you'll be facing serious federal charges. Attempting to gain unauthorized access to a military installation is not taken lightly." Dr. Mitchell nodded solemnly. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Colonel. Your dedication to security is exactly why this verification process exists." Colonel Henderson retreated to his office with Dr. Mitchell's credentials and the verification paper, leaving Sergeant Williams to escort the mysterious woman to a nearby waiting area. The base commander's office was a testament to his military career. Walls lined with commendations, photographs with various dignitaries, and a bookshelf filled with military strategy manuals. Henderson had always prided himself on his ability to assess people quickly and accurately, but Dr. Mitchell was proving to be an enigma. Settling behind his desk, Henderson picked up his secure phone line and dialed the Washington number. As he waited for someone to answer, he examined the badge one more time under his desk lamp. The closer he looked, the more details he noticed. The metalwork was incredibly intricate, with what appeared to be microprint around the borders that was too small to read without magnification. "White House Personnel Security Office. This is Director Catherine Walsh speaking." Henderson straightened in his chair. The White House Personnel Security Office was not a department he had ever had reason to contact directly. "Director Walsh, this is Colonel Marcus Henderson, commanding officer at Fort Braxton. I'm calling to verify the credentials of a Dr. Sarah Mitchell who is requesting access to my facility." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Colonel Henderson, do you have Dr. Mitchell's reference code?" Henderson read the alphanumeric sequence from the paper. Another pause followed, longer this time, and he could hear computer keys clicking in the background. "Colonel, before we proceed, I need to verify your identity. Can you please provide your military identification number and your commanding officer's name?" Henderson provided the requested information, feeling increasingly intrigued by the thoroughness of the security protocol. This was far beyond the typical verification process for standard government credentials. "Thank you, Colonel. I'm showing your identity as confirmed. Now, regarding Dr. Mitchell, yes, her credentials are legitimate and current. However, I need to ask about the nature of your facility's current status. Are you currently hosting any special operations or classified projects?" "Director Walsh, with respect, that information would be classified above your clearance level unless you have specific need-to-know authorization." "Colonel Henderson, I understand your position. However, Dr. Mitchell's presence at your facility has been anticipated. She carries what we call a presidential access authorization. Are you familiar with this type of clearance?" Henderson frowned. In all his years of service, he had never encountered a presidential access authorization. "I'm afraid I'm not familiar with that designation, Director." "It's extremely rare, Colonel. Only a handful of individuals carry this level of clearance at any given time. Dr. Mitchell has direct authorization from the President of the United States to access any federal facility, military or civilian, in the interest of national security. Her badge bears the presidential seal, which can only be issued by executive order. Henderson felt a chill run down his spine. He looked at the badge again, this time focusing on what he had initially dismissed as decorative elements. Under the bright light of his desk lamp, he could now make out the faint outline of an eagle and shield, the presidential seal, embossed into the metal in a way that was nearly invisible unless viewed from the correct angle. Director Walsh, I'm looking at the badge now. I can see what appears to be the presidential seal, but it's very subtle. How can I be certain this isn't an elaborate fake? Colonel, hold the badge under a bright light and tilt it approximately 15 degrees to your left. You should see additional elements become visible. Henderson followed the instructions and his breath caught. As the light hit the badge at the specified angle, additional text appeared, seemingly embedded within the metal itself. The words Presidential Authority became clearly visible, along with a date from just 3 months ago. I can see the additional text now, Henderson said quietly. Colonel, the technology used to create those badges is classified at the highest levels. It cannot be replicated outside of a secure government facility. What you're holding is authentic, and Dr. Mitchell's authority supersedes virtually any security protocol you might have in place. Henderson set the badge down carefully, his mind racing. Director Walsh, can you tell me anything about the nature of Dr. Mitchell's mission? I'm afraid that information is compartmentalized above my level, Colonel. What I can tell you is that Dr. Mitchell's work is of critical importance to national security, and any delay in her access to your facility could have serious consequences. The implications were staggering. Henderson had always assumed that if someone with this level of authority needed to visit his base, he would receive advance notice through military channels. The idea that someone could simply arrive at his gate with presidential authorization was both impressive and somewhat unsettling. Director Walsh, assuming I grant Dr. Mitchell access to the base, are there any special protocols I should follow? Treat her with the same respect and cooperation you would show any high-ranking government official. Her badge grants her access to any area of your facility, unless specifically restricted by national security concerns that have been briefed to you by the Pentagon. If you have any doubts about granting access to particular areas, you can call this number again for clarification. Henderson rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the decision. One more question, Director. How often do these presidential access authorizations get issued? In the past decade, Colonel, fewer than 20 individuals have carried this level of clearance. Dr. Mitchell is one of only 6 currently active holders. After ending the call, Henderson sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the badge on his desk. His entire military career had been built on following proper procedures and maintaining security. But he had never encountered a situation quite like this. The verification call had been convincing, but the implications were enormous. He picked up the badge again, noting details he had missed initially. The weight was substantial, clearly indicating expensive materials and sophisticated manufacturing. The photograph was embedded in a way that would be extremely difficult to replicate, and the microprint around the edges contained text so small it would require specialized equipment to reproduce. More concerning was the realization that if Dr. Mitchell truly carried presidential authority, his initial skepticism and the delay at the gate could be viewed as a serious breach of protocol. On the other hand, his careful verification process had revealed the authenticity of her credentials, which was exactly what security procedures were designed to accomplish. Henderson walked to his window and looked out at the gate area where Dr. Mitchell was waiting. From this distance, she appeared to be reading something on her phone, completely relaxed despite the unusual circumstances. Her calm demeanor throughout the verification process now made more sense. She had been confident because she knew her credentials would check out. The colonel realized he was facing a career-defining moment. His response to this situation would likely be reported up the chain of command, and possibly to the White House itself. The woman sitting in his waiting area carried authority that came directly from the highest office in the land, and she had been patient with his verification process despite the delay it caused. Henderson made his decision. He secured the badge in its leather folder and headed back toward the gate, knowing that the next few minutes would determine how this extraordinary encounter would be remembered. Dr. Mitchell's presence at Fort Braxton was clearly part of something much larger than a routine base visit, and he was about to become part of whatever mission had brought her here. As he walked through the corridor, Henderson reflected on the lesson he was learning about assumptions and appearances. Dr. Mitchell had arrived looking like any other government bureaucrat, but she carried authority that exceeded his own by several levels. The reminder that things were not always as they appeared was one he would not soon forget. Colonel Henderson walked back toward the gate area with measured steps, the leather credential folder in his hand feeling heavier with each stride. The conversation with Director Walsh had fundamentally changed his understanding of the situation, but he still struggled to reconcile the unassuming woman in the waiting area with the extraordinary authority she apparently wielded. Dr. Mitchell looked up from her phone as Henderson approached, her expression calm but attentive. She had been waiting for nearly 45 minutes without complaint, a patience that now seemed less like resignation and more like the confidence of someone accustomed to having their credentials thoroughly verified. "Dr. Mitchell," Henderson began, his tone noticeably different from their earlier exchange, "I've completed the verification process. I owe you an apology for the delay and for questioning the authenticity of your credentials." Dr. Mitchell stood and smiled genuinely. "Colonel, please don't apologize. Your thoroughness is exactly what I would expect from a facility of this caliber. Security protocols exist for good reason, and I would have been concerned if you had simply accepted my credentials without proper verification." Henderson extended the credential folder back to her. "The Director of White House Personnel Security confirmed that you carry presidential access authorization. I have to admit, in 30 years of military service, I've never encountered anything quite like this." "It's certainly not common," Dr. Mitchell agreed, securing her credentials in her briefcase. "Most of my work doesn't require visits to military installations. But when national security matters intersect with military operations, these authorizations become necessary." Sergeant Williams, who had been observing the exchange from a respectful distance, approached as Henderson gestured for him to join them. "Sergeant, Dr. Mitchell's credentials have been verified at the highest levels. Please prepare a visitor's pass with full base access and arrange for an escort vehicle." "Yes, sir," Williams replied, though his expression suggested he was curious about the dramatic change in his commanding officer's demeanor. As Williams headed back to the checkpoint to prepare the necessary paperwork, Henderson found himself studying Dr. Mitchell with new eyes. Her unremarkable appearance now seemed like a deliberate choice rather than an accident. Someone carrying presidential authority would undoubtedly prefer to move through the world without drawing unnecessary attention. "Dr. Mitchell, if you don't mind me asking, what brings you to Fort Braxton? Your Director Walsh indicated this visit was anticipated, but I wasn't briefed about any special operations or VIP visits." Dr. Mitchell considered her response carefully. "Colonel, I'm part of a team that conducts security assessments for critical infrastructure and military installations. My role involves evaluating potential vulnerabilities and recommending improvements to existing protocols. Fort Braxton was selected for assessment due to its strategic importance and exemplary security record." Henderson nodded, though he sensed there was more to the story. "Are there particular areas of the base you need to examine?" "I'll need access to your communications center, weapons storage facilities, and perimeter security systems. I'll also want to review your emergency response procedures and interview key personnel about their protocols." The scope of Dr. Mitchell's requirements confirmed the seriousness of her mission. The areas she mentioned contained some of the most sensitive operations on the base, and access was typically restricted to personnel with the highest clearance levels. "Those are our most secure areas," Henderson said. "Normally, even high-ranking visitors require extensive advance coordination and Pentagon approval to access those facilities." "I understand the sensitivity, Colonel. My authorization specifically covers facilities of this type. However, I want to emphasize that my assessment will focus on strengthening your security, not identifying weaknesses for any outside parties." Henderson appreciated her directness. "Dr. Mitchell, I have to ask, is there a specific threat or concern that prompted this assessment?" Dr. Mitchell paused, choosing her words carefully. "Colonel, I can tell you that recent intelligence has highlighted potential vulnerabilities in our critical military infrastructure. The purpose of my assessment is to ensure that installations like Fort Braxton are prepared for evolving threats." I'm not at liberty to discuss specific intelligence details, but I can assure you that this evaluation is proactive rather than reactive. The implication was clear. There was intelligence suggesting potential threats to military installations, and Dr. Mitchell's assessment was part of a broader effort to strengthen national defense capabilities. Henderson felt a mixture of pride that his base had been selected for evaluation and concern about the nature of the threats that made such assessments necessary. Sergeant Williams returned with a visitor's pass and the keys to a base vehicle. "Ma'am, this pass will give you access to all areas of the installation. The vehicle is at your disposal for the duration of your visit." "Thank you, Sergeant," Dr. Mitchell replied, accepting the pass and keys. "I appreciate your professionalism." Henderson found himself wanting to understand more about the woman who had arrived so unexpectedly at his gate. "Dr. Mitchell, if you don't mind me asking, what's your background? Military intelligence, CIA, NSA? I have a doctorate in cybersecurity and 15 years of experience in government service across multiple agencies," she replied. "My current role involves coordinating security assessments that cross traditional agency boundaries. When potential threats affect multiple aspects of national security, my team provides unified evaluation and recommendations." The answer was informative but deliberately vague, suggesting that Dr. Mitchell's actual role might be even more significant than she was indicating. Henderson realized that someone with presidential access authorization would likely be involved in matters that crossed traditional organizational lines and required the highest levels of security clearance. "Colonel, before I begin my assessment, I want you to know that I'll be preparing a report on the professionalism and effectiveness of your gate security procedures. Your Sergeant Williams and the entire gate team handled this situation exactly as they should have. Their adherence to protocol, even when faced with unusual circumstances, reflects excellent training and leadership." Henderson felt a surge of pride in his personnel. "Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. We work hard to maintain the highest standards." "It shows," she replied. "The verification process I just experienced demonstrates that Fort Braxton takes security seriously at every level. That's exactly what we need to see." As they walked toward the base vehicle, Henderson reflected on the morning's events. What had begun as a routine gate inspection had evolved into an encounter with one of the most highly authorized individuals in government service. The experience had reminded him that in the world of national security, assumptions could be dangerous and appearances could be deceiving. Dr. Mitchell paused beside the vehicle and turned to Henderson. "Colonel, I want you to know that your initial skepticism about my credentials was absolutely appropriate. In my line of work, I encounter many military and civilian personnel who are too quick to accept authority without proper verification. Your insistence on following protocol, even when it caused delay and inconvenience, is exactly the kind of security consciousness that keeps our nation safe." Henderson appreciated the validation, but he also recognized that the day's real challenges were just beginning. Escorting someone with presidential authorization through his base's most sensitive areas would require careful coordination and attention to detail. Whatever threats had prompted Dr. Mitchell's assessment, Fort Braxton would need to prove that it was ready to meet them. The first stop on Dr. Mitchell's assessment tour was Fort Braxton's Communications Center, a facility that Henderson considered the nerve center of base operations. As they approached the heavily secured building, Henderson noticed that Dr. Mitchell was observing everything: the placement of security cameras, the positioning of guard posts, the design of vehicle barriers, and even the landscaping around the facility. "Impressive perimeter security," she commented as they reached the entrance. "The overlapping coverage zones and multiple authentication points create effective layers of protection." Henderson felt a sense of professional pride as he guided Dr. Mitchell through the security checkpoint. The communications center required biometric identification, key card access, and personal recognition by security personnel. It was a process that typically took several minutes even for authorized personnel. Dr. Mitchell presented her presidential authorization badge to the security guards, who examined it with the same careful attention that Sergeant Williams had shown at the main gate. Henderson watched as one of the guards made a verification call, following the same protocol that had been established for her credentials. "Dr. Mitchell," the senior guard said after completing his call, "your access has been confirmed at the highest levels. Welcome to Fort Braxton's Communications Center. Inside the facility, Dr. Mitchell's demeanor became notably more focused and analytical. She examined the arrangement of equipment, the backup power systems, and the physical security measures with the eye of someone who understood both the technology and the threats it faced. "Colonel Henderson, can you walk me through your emergency communication protocols?" she asked. "Specifically, how would you maintain contact with Pentagon and other critical facilities if your primary systems were compromised?" Henderson explained the multiple redundancy systems, satellite backup communications, and hardened emergency procedures that the base maintained. As he spoke, Dr. Mitchell took notes on a secure tablet, occasionally asking detailed technical questions that revealed an impressive depth of knowledge about military communication systems. "Your backup systems are well designed," she observed. "However, I noticed that several of your redundancy protocols rely on similar network pathways. Have you considered what would happen if those pathways were simultaneously targeted?" The question sent a chill through Henderson. The scenario Dr. Mitchell was describing would require sophisticated coordination and advanced intelligence about Fort Braxton's systems, exactly the kind of threat that would necessitate a presidential-level security assessment. "Dr. Mitchell, are you suggesting that potential adversaries have detailed knowledge of our communication infrastructure?" "Colonel, I can't discuss specific intelligence findings, but I can tell you that our adversaries are becoming increasingly sophisticated in their understanding of military communication systems. The days when we could assume our protocols were unknown to hostile parties are behind us." As they moved through different areas of the communications center, Dr. Mitchell's questions became increasingly pointed. She asked about personnel security clearances, rotation schedules for sensitive positions, and procedures for detecting insider threats. Her line of inquiry suggested that the threats she was assessing came not just from external adversaries, but potentially from within military organizations themselves. Their next stop was the base weapons storage facility, an underground complex that housed everything from small arms to advanced missile systems. The security here was even more stringent than the communications center, requiring multiple authorizations and continuous escort by armed guards. Dr. Mitchell examined the facility's layout, with particular attention to access controls and inventory management systems. "Colonel, how often do you conduct complete inventory audits of your weapons systems?" "Monthly for small arms, quarterly for larger systems, and annually for our most advanced weapons," Henderson replied. "We also conduct random spot checks throughout the year." "Excellent," Dr. Mitchell said, making notes. "Have you ever discovered discrepancies during these audits?" Henderson hesitated. There had been minor discrepancies over the years, typically accounting errors or misplaced equipment that was eventually located. But Dr. Mitchell's question seemed to be probing for something more serious. "We've had occasional minor discrepancies that were resolved upon investigation," he said carefully. "Nothing that suggested theft or unauthorized access," Dr. Mitchell nodded. "That's what I would expect from a well-managed facility. However, I want you to consider implementing additional tracking measures for your most sensitive weapon systems. Recent intelligence suggests that adversaries are particularly interested in obtaining samples of our advanced military technology." The implication was sobering. Henderson realized that Dr. Mitchell was suggesting that foreign intelligence services might be actively attempting to infiltrate military installations to steal weapons technology. The thought that Fort Braxton could be a target for such operations was deeply concerning. As they toured the perimeter security systems, Dr. Mitchell's assessment became even more comprehensive. She examined sensor placements, reviewed guard rotation schedules, and tested response procedures by asking hypothetical questions about various threat scenarios. "Colonel, if you detected multiple simultaneous breaches at different points along your perimeter, how would you coordinate your response?" she asked. Henderson outlined the base's emergency response procedures, which involved automated alerts, rapid deployment of security teams, and immediate communication with off-base military authorities. Dr. Mitchell listened carefully, occasionally asking for clarification about timing and coordination protocols. "Your procedures are solid," she said, "but I recommend conducting regular drills that simulate coordinated attacks. Many military installations excel at responding to single-point threats, but struggle when facing multiple simultaneous challenges." Throughout the day, Henderson found himself increasingly impressed by Dr. Mitchell's expertise and increasingly concerned about the threat she was assessing. Her questions weren't theoretical. They were based on real intelligence about evolving threats to military installations. During a brief break in their tour, Henderson decided to address his growing concerns directly. Dr. Mitchell, the scenarios you're discussing suggest some very serious threats to military installations. Should I be implementing immediate changes to our security protocols? Dr. Mitchell considered her response carefully. Colonel, I can tell you that the threat environment is evolving rapidly. The security measures that were adequate 5 years ago may not be sufficient today. My assessment will result in specific recommendations for Fort Braxton, but I encourage you to think proactively about scenarios that go beyond traditional threat models. What kind of scenarios are you referring to? Consider threats that combine cyber attacks with physical infiltration, coordinated attacks on multiple facilities simultaneously, and adversaries who have detailed advanced knowledge of your security procedures. The days of assuming that our enemies are technologically inferior or organizationally unsophisticated are over. Henderson felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. As base commander, the security of Fort Braxton and its personnel was his primary responsibility. Dr. Mitchell's assessment was revealing vulnerabilities and threats that he had never fully considered. Dr. Mitchell, after you complete your assessment, what happens next? I'll prepare a detailed report with specific recommendations for strengthening Fort Braxton's security. Some recommendations can be implemented immediately with existing resources, while others may require additional funding and Pentagon approval. The important thing is that you'll have a clear understanding of potential vulnerabilities and a roadmap for addressing them. As they concluded the day's initial assessment, Henderson realized that Dr. Mitchell's visit was just the beginning of a process that would likely transform Fort Braxton's security procedures. The woman who had arrived unannounced at his gate that morning was providing insights that could be crucial for protecting not just his base, but potentially the broader network of military installations across the country. That evening, Colonel Henderson sat in his office reviewing the day's events and preparing for the continuation of Dr. Mitchell's assessment the following morning. The scope and depth of her evaluation had exceeded anything he had anticipated, and her probing questions had revealed potential vulnerabilities that kept him awake long into the night. As he reviewed his notes from their tour, Henderson found himself repeatedly returning to Dr. Mitchell's credentials. The verification call with Director Walsh had confirmed their authenticity, but he realized he hadn't fully processed the implications of what he had learned. Presidential access authorization was not just an elevated security clearance. It represented direct authority from the Commander-in-Chief himself. Henderson retrieved Dr. Mitchell's business card from his desk drawer and examined it under his desk lamp. Unlike the elaborate badge, the card was remarkably simple. Her name, title as Special Security Consultant, and a phone number with a Washington area code. No agency affiliation, no government logos, nothing that would indicate the extraordinary level of authority she carried. The more Henderson thought about it, the more questions arose. How many people in the entire country carried presidential authorization? What kind of threats would require this level of response? And most importantly, what had brought Dr. Mitchell specifically to Fort Braxton? The next morning brought unexpected developments. Henderson arrived at his office to find a secure message waiting from Pentagon leadership, requesting a briefing on Dr. Mitchell's assessment. The message was classified at the highest levels and indicated that her evaluation was part of a broader national security initiative involving multiple military installations. Dr. Mitchell arrived promptly at 800 hours, carrying a different briefcase than she had used the previous day. This one appeared more technical, with what looked like specialized equipment visible through its clear compartments. "Good morning, Colonel," she said. "I hope you had a chance to review our discussion from yesterday. Today I'd like to focus on your cybersecurity infrastructure and electronic warfare preparedness." Henderson led her to the base's cybersecurity center, a facility that had been substantially upgraded over the past 2 years in response to growing concerns about digital threats to military systems. As they walked, he decided to address some of his questions directly. "Dr. Mitchell, I received a secure communication from Pentagon leadership this morning. It appears that your assessment is part of a much larger evaluation process. Can you tell me how many installations are being assessed?" Dr. Mitchell paused in her stride. "Colonel, I can tell you that this evaluation is being conducted at installations across all service branches. The scope is comprehensive and the timeline is accelerated due to emerging threat intelligence. Emerging threat intelligence? Colonel, what I'm about to share with you is classified at the highest levels. Recent intelligence indicates that foreign adversaries have developed sophisticated capabilities for coordinated attacks on our military infrastructure. We're not just talking about cyber attacks or physical infiltration. We're looking at the possibility of simultaneous, multi-vector assaults designed to cripple our defensive capabilities. Henderson felt a chill run down his spine. The scenarios Dr. Mitchell was describing represented a fundamental shift in the threat environment facing military installations. As they entered the cybersecurity center, Dr. Mitchell's demeanor became intensely focused. She examined the facility's network architecture, backup systems, and intrusion detection capabilities with the precision of someone who understood both the technology and the specific threats it was designed to counter. "Colonel, I need you to understand something," she said as she reviewed network security logs. "The assessment I'm conducting isn't just about identifying vulnerabilities. It's about ensuring that installations like Fort Braxton can continue operating even under sustained, coordinated attack." Henderson watched as Dr. Mitchell connected her specialized equipment to various systems throughout the cybersecurity center. The devices appeared to be conducting sophisticated penetration testing and vulnerability scanning, but at a level of complexity that exceeded anything he had seen before. "Dr. Mitchell, the equipment you're using, it's more advanced than anything our own cybersecurity team has access to. Where does this technology come from?" "Colonel, the tools I'm using are developed by a classified research program that operates under direct presidential oversight. The technology is designed specifically for assessing critical infrastructure against the most advanced threats our intelligence community has identified." As Dr. Mitchell worked, her phone began receiving a series of encrypted messages. Henderson noticed her expression becoming increasingly serious as she read each communication. "Colonel, I need to make a secure call. Is there a SIF facility available?" Henderson led her to the base's sensitive compartmented information facility, a secure room designed for handling the most classified communications. While Dr. Mitchell made her call, Henderson waited outside, his mind racing with possibilities about what developments could require such urgent communication. When Dr. Mitchell emerged from the SCIF 20 minutes later, her expression was grave. "Colonel Henderson, I need to accelerate my assessment timeline. Recent intelligence has moved up our concerns about potential threats to critical military installations. What kind of timeline are we talking about?" "I need to complete my evaluation of Fort Braxton within the next 48 hours. Additionally, I'm going to need access to your most classified operational procedures and contingency plans." Henderson realized that whatever intelligence Dr. Mitchell had received represented a significant escalation in threat levels. The urgency in her voice and the compressed timeline suggested that the theoretical threats they had been discussing were becoming much more immediate. "Dr. Mitchell, you mentioned that you're one of only 6 people currently carrying presidential access authorization. Given the urgency of this situation, are the other 5 conducting similar assessments at other installations?" "Colonel, all 6 of us are currently deployed conducting emergency security assessments at critical military installations across the country. What we're seeing suggests a coordinated effort to probe our defensive capabilities, and we need to ensure that our most important facilities are prepared for potential attacks." Henderson felt the full weight of the situation settling upon him. Fort Braxton wasn't just undergoing a routine security assessment, it was being evaluated as part of an emergency response to credible threats against multiple military installations. As they returned to Dr. Mitchell's assessment, Henderson found himself looking at her credentials with new understanding. The presidential seal on her badge wasn't just a symbol of authority, it represented direct engagement by the highest levels of government in response to serious national security threats. "Dr. Mitchell," he said as they prepared to review the base's most sensitive contingency plans, "I want you to know that Fort Braxton will provide whatever support and access you need. If there are threats to our military installations, we need to be prepared." Dr. Mitchell looked at him directly, and for the first time since her arrival, he saw the full seriousness of her mission reflected in her eyes. "Colonel Henderson, What we're facing represents one of the most serious challenges to our national security in decades. The assessment I'm conducting here could be crucial for protecting not just Fort Braxton, but the entire network of installations that defend our country. Henderson realized that the woman standing before him wasn't just a security consultant. She was one of 6 individuals trusted by the President of the United States to evaluate and strengthen the nation's most critical military defenses in the face of an unprecedented threat. The presidential seal on her badge represented not just authority, but a sacred trust to protect the country's defensive capabilities. The final day of Dr. Mitchell's assessment began before dawn, with Henderson arriving at his office to find her already waiting in the lobby. She had spent the previous evening reviewing classified contingency plans and conducting advanced technical assessments of the base's most sensitive systems. The urgency that had marked her previous day's work had intensified overnight. "Colonel Henderson," she said as they walked toward his office, "I received additional intelligence updates during the night. The timeline for completing my assessment has been compressed even further. I need to transmit my preliminary findings to Washington within the next 6 hours." Henderson poured 2 cups of coffee and settled across from Dr. Mitchell at his conference table. The weight of the past 3 days was evident in both their expressions. The routine base inspection that had begun with questions about credentials had evolved into something far more significant. "Dr. Mitchell, before you finalize your assessment, I need to understand something. The presidential access authorization you carry, when was it issued and under what circumstances?" Dr. Mitchell reached into her briefcase and withdrew her credentials one final time. Under the bright conference room lights, Henderson could now clearly see details that had been invisible during their first encounter at the gate. The presidential seal was indeed embedded in the metal with extraordinary precision, but surrounding it were additional elements that he was only now able to discern. "Colonel, this authorization was issued 3 months ago, in response to intelligence indicating that foreign adversaries had developed unprecedented capabilities for attacking our critical military infrastructure. The President personally signed the executive order creating this assessment program." Henderson examined the badge more closely than ever before. In addition to the presidential seal, he could now see microscopic text that included the date of authorization, a unique serial number, and what appeared to be a digital signature embedded in the metal itself. The technology required to create such a credential was clearly far beyond anything available outside the most classified government programs. "The 6 individuals carrying these authorizations," Henderson said, "were you all specifically selected for this mission?" "Colonel, each of us was chosen based on our expertise in different aspects of military security and our experience with the most advanced threat scenarios. My background combines cybersecurity, physical security assessment, and intelligence analysis specifically focused on threats to military installations." Dr. Mitchell opened her secure tablet and showed Henderson a preliminary summary of her assessment findings. The document was marked with the highest classification levels Henderson had ever seen, and the presidential seal appeared as a digital watermark on every page. "Colonel Henderson, I want you to see the scope of what we've discovered during this assessment," she said. "Fort Braxton's security measures are among the best I've evaluated, but even the strongest installations have vulnerabilities when facing the threats we're now confronting." The assessment document outlined sophisticated threat scenarios that combined cyber warfare, physical infiltration, insider threats, and coordinated attacks on multiple installations simultaneously. Reading through the findings, Henderson realized that the traditional security paradigms that had guided military installations for decades were no longer adequate. "Dr. Mitchell, these threat scenarios, they're not theoretical, are they?" "Colonel, the intelligence community has identified specific capabilities being developed by foreign adversaries. While I can't discuss operational details, I can tell you that the threats outlined in this assessment are based on confirmed intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions." Henderson studied the recommendations section of Dr. Mitchell's report. The proposed security enhancements were comprehensive, involving everything from advanced cybersecurity systems to modified personnel screening procedures to new emergency response protocols designed for coordinated attacks. "The implementation of these recommendations," Henderson said, will require significant resources and Pentagon approval for the most advanced systems. Colonel, funding for these enhancements has already been allocated under a classified appropriation linked to this assessment program. The installations that demonstrate the greatest commitment to implementing comprehensive security improvements will receive priority support for advanced defensive systems. Henderson realized that Dr. Mitchell's assessment was not just an evaluation, it was an opportunity for Fort Braxton to receive cutting-edge security technology and training that would position the base at the forefront of military defensive capabilities. As Dr. Mitchell prepared her final report, Henderson reflected on the extraordinary sequence of events that had begun 3 days earlier with a routine gate inspection. The woman he had initially doubted was not only authentic but represented one of the most significant security initiatives undertaken by the federal government in recent history. Dr. Mitchell, he said as she finished her documentation, I owe you an apology that goes beyond my initial skepticism about your credentials. I failed to recognize the significance of the presidential seal and the authority it represents. Dr. Mitchell looked up from her work and smiled. Colonel Henderson, your response to my arrival was exactly what it should have been. The presidential seal on my badge isn't meant to intimidate or overwhelm security personnel. It's meant to ensure that critical security assessments can be conducted with appropriate authority and access. She held up her badge one final time, and Henderson could now see it with complete clarity. The presidential seal was indeed there, embedded with technology that made it virtually impossible to counterfeit. But more than that, it represented a direct connection between the President of the United States and the critical mission of protecting America's military infrastructure. Colonel, I want you to understand something about this seal, Dr. Mitchell said. Only the President can authorize its issuance, and it carries with it both tremendous authority and tremendous responsibility. The 6 of us who carry these credentials are entrusted with evaluating and strengthening the defenses that protect our nation's military capabilities. Henderson stood and extended his hand in a gesture of respect and partnership. Dr. Mitchell, Fort Braxton is honored to have been selected for this assessment. Whatever threats we're facing, this installation will be prepared. Dr. Mitchell shook his hand firmly. Colonel Henderson, based on my assessment, Fort Braxton represents exactly the kind of military installation that will be crucial for defending our country against evolving threats. Your personnel, your procedures, and your commitment to security excellence make this base a model for military installations across the country. As Dr. Mitchell packed her equipment and prepared to depart, Henderson realized that the encounter had fundamentally changed his understanding of both security protocols and the threats facing military installations. The woman who had arrived at his gate 3 days earlier had not only conducted a crucial assessment but had reminded him that in the world of national security, assumptions could be dangerous, and vigilance was essential. The presidential seal that had initially seemed like an unusual decorative element was actually one of the most significant symbols of authority in the American government. Dr. Mitchell's credentials represented not just personal authorization but the full weight and responsibility of protecting the nation's military capabilities against unprecedented threats. As Henderson watched Dr. Mitchell's vehicle disappear through the main gate, he understood that Fort Braxton had been part of something much larger than a routine security assessment. The base had been evaluated as part of a comprehensive national defense initiative, and the lessons learned would help protect military installations across the country against the evolving threats of the 21st century.